Remember when video game marketing had that big push for destructible environments? It felt like every E3 for like a decade had at least a couple of trailers filled with explosions and toppling skyscrapers. It mostly started somewhere around Red Faction and mostly ended sometime around when the Battlefield games started to go downhill. In between, there was a subset of games that heralded destructible environments as their big thing, and it sort of seemed like an obvious next step during a transformative time for video game tech. One such game came out at the start of 2003 called War of the Monsters, a first-party Sony game by Incognito Entertainment, the dev behind Twisted Metal, though this was led by a different team, and this game has just stuck with me for the last 20 years. It's a special game. It's often brought up online with a lot of fondness. It's one of those games that was destined to be a cult favorite from the moment it came out. And just in my day-to-day life lately, when I've been chatting to friends and they've asked me what video I'm working on, I'd say something like, you probably haven't heard of it, but it's this old PS2 game called War of the Monsters, and the amount of elated responses I've had from mates just exclaiming how much they loved this game growing up has really surprised me. So to properly introduce this, it's a kaiju and old Hollywood-inspired giant monster arena fighting game. You pick a game mode, you pick a monster from a roster where each has different combos, movement speeds, that sort of thing, and you fight. It's very much structured like a classic 2D fighter, but the fights themselves have fully 3D movement. You're very mobile, you can lock on, there's pickups, you can throw cars and rubble and other objects at your enemies and use them as melee weapons, and it's not always 1v1. You can verse up to 3 opponents. It's an easy concept to grasp, and frankly, it's not an amazing game, and it hasn't aged super well, but War of the Monsters did a few key things extremely well, and I just want to talk about them. The fully destructible environments is one of them, kind of the main one, and without trying to sound like a mid-2000s making-of puff piece, and of course War of the Monsters has one of those, you really can just flatten entire maps. I spent a solid 20 minutes throwing cars at buildings, and when I was done the map looked like a wasteland. Everything crumbles from streetlights to skyscrapers, and it's very satisfying. It's really impressive stuff for the time too, that predates games that did similar things like Hulk Ultimate Destruction and Mercenaries by a couple of years, and War of the Monsters runs at what I believe is a smooth 60 frames per second, or at least close to it, even on the original PS2. I played the PS5 port for this video, but here's some PS2 footage just to show how the frame performance is about the same. If we're keeping tabs, a very similar Godzilla game came out at around the same time and had similar destruction, but I'd argue that War of the Monsters was the more technically impressive game. Technical accomplishment aside, the magic here lies more in how War of the Monsters uses its environments. These cities feel so alive. They're always moving, always evolving, traffic is freaking out, emergency vehicles are hopelessly trying to sort out your mess, and if you look closely, there's even massive crowds of pedestrians running around and freaking out below you, and they truly are massive crowds, like hundreds of these little 2D sprite pedestrians can be seen on the streets below, streets that are so immediately radiant and full of life. There's some deep-rooted action-reaction psychological click in your brain that can happen when a video game simply reacts to the things you do, like when your boss in Deus Ex gets mad at you for wandering into the wrong bathroom, or when Bethesda characters catch you stealing and call the guards, or crashing into Simpsons hit-and-run characters and watching them yell and flip through the level while physics objects start flying everywhere and the cops show up. There's a reaction, sometimes a chain reaction, as a response to something you did that, in a way, is inherently satisfying. It sounds really simple, and it is a really, really low-level concept that we don't consciously think about much, but whether it's as small as getting a scratch on the car you're driving, or as large as a video game story concluding in an entirely different way, when your actions in a video game come with a reaction, it makes them meaningful. And that simple concept is at the core of games that use destruction well. There's no more immediate a reaction to your action than seeing your grenade launcher blow up a wall in Bad Company, or more recently, think of games like Teardown, or Control, or Trepang 2. These games do things with concepts like destruction and bullet impact effects and physics objects and blood effects really effectively. They just sort of react to your shooting or your explosives or superpowers, whatever it may be, in a way that's often described as visceral. You can extend this feeling to action films too. There's something about seeing Keanu Reeves just rip apart a room and everyone in it in John Wick. Like, almost everything he does sees someone die or something get destroyed. There's this kinetic immediacy to all of his quick setup and payoff action moments that are really satisfying when put in quick succession. War of the Monsters shares this feeling in its own 2003 cheesy PS2 game way. It reacts to almost everything you do. Even something as simple as just walking around will have you crushing the pedestrians below your feet into these lovably corny blood splats, and say you grab an opponent and throw them into a building that's one hit away from falling down. They'll, hurl through the air, smash into the building will topple, and that's simple fun in and of itself, but there's a lot more to it than that. Things that can and often do happen when you throw a monster into a building in War of the Monsters open bracket 2003 close bracket. 1. The building falls down. 2. Your opponent takes damage. 3. The building creates a pile of rubble, bits of which can be picked up and used as weapons or thrown. 4. More desirable weapons that you'd otherwise need to climb onto the roof for will fall to the ground, like explosive generators or radio towers. 5. Traffic will get caught in the rubble, which you can pick up and throw. 6. Pedestrians will flee the area. 7. If the building falls on its side, which some buildings do, it could flatten and kill a monster, or flatten traffic or pedestrians. 8. Orb pickups hidden inside the building will be revealed. 9. The monster could bounce off the building and destroy cars or flatten pedestrians, or even knock down another building, potentially chain reacting all the events listed again. And 10, I can't think of a 10th one, but 10 is a nice round number. The point is, simply throwing a monster into a building sets off this big chain of possible reactions, some of which are meaningful to the combat, like spawning pickups, others are more aesthetic, like crushing pedestrians, and when you multiply this super reactive, super destructive, visceral, if you will, chain of events across an entire city-wide battle, it results in this incredibly organic, evolving, ballistic, weighty affair that just was simply unlike anything else at the time. It's really delightful. It can't be understated just how well the sound design and soundtrack does to back everything up too. I'll just let it play for a moment here and listen to how loud and old Hollywood B-movie it all sounds. It's clear what the vibe they're going for is. This is a love letter through and through, and most of the maps and monsters are obvious analogues or references to films like King Kong, Godzilla, Gorgo, This Island Earth. I'm sure monster film lovers are picking up on all sorts of references watching this, and more than I can spot. The character Ultra V is a callback to the Majinga franchise, which I find great, like they weren't afraid to get a bit eclectic with it. The drive-in theater menu screens and movie poster loading screens go a long way towards capturing the aesthetic here too, as do the handful of campy pre-rendered cutscenes. An obvious love for the source material is strewn throughout, and while War of the Monsters certainly has fun with its references, it does it so lovingly. Like, it uses these aesthetics and mechanics to make its monsters really come across as these big, scary, powerful Goliaths fighting in epic scenes, rather than, silly, quaint relics of an old era to be laughed at. This is far more of an homage than a satire. So picture yourself circa 2003 booting War of the Monsters up for the first time and try and think about just how impressive it was. My first exposure to this was at a friend's place with its demo on one of those official PlayStation Magazine discs, and I was immediately dazzled and charmed by the whole thing. It was like a video game from the future. When I finally got my own copy, it was a blast playing more than just the one map, and the more you play, the more attention to detail is revealed. Levels go the extra mile with small details, like many of them have these special triggers you can do to set off tsunamis and earthquakes and volcanoes that were quite the spectacle. It's incredible just how much depth and detail there is to the combat too, like directional attacks, counters, catching things thrown at you, massive combos, objects like tanks and turrets that you can pick up and shoot your opponent with, taunts that put you in a sort of rage mode. You'll instinctively button mash at first, but there's a lot more to it than meets the eye. But after some hours with War of the Monsters, there was that slight sinking feeling that maybe it doesn't quite deliver on its first impression. The camera is the first problem you'll notice. Like, whenever you're locked off, it's a bit of a clunky mess, so you'll try and stay locked on whenever you can, but even then the camera can just squeeze and lag around in weird ways. Then you might finish the campaign in less than a couple of hours and wonder if that's it, and it kind of is. You can play through the campaign with any monster, and you can up the difficulty. It gets really difficult on medium and hard, but it's exactly the same campaign no matter which monster you pick, where the only difference is you get a quick origin story cutscene for your monster at the end. And crucially, sort of the main problem is, the campaign just isn't great. There's 3 boss battles, and they're all tedious. There's no storyline, as it just sort of hops between fight after fight. There's a handful of maps that aren't set in cities, so they lack the wow factor and destruction that the city maps do. The opponent AI always plays super defensively and will run off for health pickups after the slightest bit of damage, and it's real easy to get ganged up on and just juggled to death. If you're sick of the campaign and you don't have a friend to play with, you can instead set up custom fights or play an endurance mode, but that's it. None of this would be as big a deal as it is if the combat was better. For all its depth and detail, the fights begin to get real clunky, exploitable, and unbalanced once you're familiar with them. The faster characters like Ultra V or Praetor seem to be much better than the slower ones. It never feels practical to try and pull off the bigger combos. Blocks are too easily broken and take too long to enter. Your light melee attack and ranged attack are assigned to a single button, where punching or shooting will activate depending on how close you are to an opponent, which feels very gooey. Brawling up close is broadly pretty clunky, and throwables that pierce your enemies, like radio towers, are super overpowered. Like, if you get hit by one, you basically can't do anything for a solid 5 seconds, and it can be incredibly hard to see one coming. Maybe once you hit some elite pro level War of the Monsters skill tier, these issues aren't as big, but judging by how no competitive scene formed around this game at all, I doubt it. What's worse is there's no tutorial or practice mode or way to enter an empty map. It's all really underexplained. Like, I found myself checking the manual to figure out how to do moves, which is very old-fashioned even for 2003. You're also expected to do a ton of grinding to unlock skins, maps, extra characters, and some throwaway 2-player minigames. Dodgeball is the best one, and again, if the combat was better, you'd kind of just want to practice it anyway and grinding wouldn't be a big deal, but the combat isn't that great, so it just feels like grinding. And so, where War of the Monsters really shines brightest is as a whimsical split-screen game. Invite a few friends over and just crash and bash and laugh about it. I'd wager those of us who remember this game the most fondly had siblings to play it with, or a group of friends who loved it because it's got a great first impression. It's perfect to pick up and play and button mash in. It's immediately fun, and sending each other flying around the map is a hoot. I tell ya, it's a hoot. It's the kind of game that'll have you grinning every time you boot it up, but an hour or 2 is enough. I imagine this would have flown off the shelves at Blockbuster before being placed right back on those shelves the next day. It's also a bit of a bummer that it only supports 2-player split screen, considering it has 4 monster battles. You'd sort of have to pass the controller around a bit if you were treating this like a party game. Apparently there's evidence in the game's files that suggests this was going to have an online mode, but that never eventuated. This was also the perfect game for those kids who just loved bashing action figures together. That's kind of basically what War of the Monsters is, right? Like, it's an imaginative video game realization of what goes on in a kid's head when they bash action figures together. Like, combat balance, grinding, who cares? Just let me bash King Kong into Godzilla. Reflecting on it now, War of the Monsters was never really set up to make a big splash for Sony. These aesthetics just weren't the in thing. This combat just isn't there, and the lack of single-player content knocked it down further, especially when the single-player content that is here just is so unremarkable. It wasn't an easy sell, and in 2003, we were only a couple of years away from the 360 and a couple of years away from games that would do far more with destructible environments. It's not a fair comparison to make, but it's crazy to think that something like Crysis would release just 4 years later, and it's no wonder that War of the Monsters feels like it sort of came and went. But for a brief moment there, War of the Monsters captured a certain magic that few games do, and it capitalized on an aesthetic that we've rarely seen in games since. For all its flaws, it remains the fondly remembered cult favorite that it is because of its dazzling presentation, immediate charm, and loving homages. You know, the things it did well, and the things it did well are things that it did extremely well. For that reason, War of the Monsters deserves to be remembered all these years later.
5:30, Capcom.